The cargo ship descended through the orange clouds of Vareth 7 as Daniel Carter gripped the controls and guided his vessel toward the mining outpost below. Watching the landing lights blink through the thick atmosphere that covered this remote world, he had been making supply runs to this outpost for 3 years now, delivering medicine and equipment to the small human colony that worked the rich mineral deposits found deep beneath the surface. And though the pay was modest, he enjoyed the quiet routine of independent freight work far from the busy lanes of core space. The landing was smooth, and Daniel powered down the engines before stepping out into the dusty air of the outpost, where his old friend Kevin Price was already walking toward him with a warm smile on his face. "Danny boy," Kevin called out as he approached with his hand extended. "Right on time as always, and we really need those medical supplies you are carrying." Daniel shook his hand firmly, then nodded toward the cargo hold of his ship, explaining that he had brought everything on the list plus some extra antibiotics that the colony on Ferrix 3 had donated. When they heard about the fever outbreak here, Kevin thanked him and called over some workers to help unload the crates while the two old friends walked toward the main building to catch up over coffee and share news from across the sector. They had served together in the military years ago, back when Daniel worked as a combat medic on the front lines of a war that nobody really understood. And though those days were behind them now, the bond they shared remained as strong as ever. The outpost was quiet that evening as the miners finished their shifts and gathered in the common hall for dinner, their voices filling the air with laughter and conversation, while Daniel sat with Kevin and talked about old times and new opportunities. But the peace did not last. A sudden explosion rocked the building and sent people tumbling from their chairs as alarms began screaming throughout the outpost. Warning lights flashing red in every corridor as the sound of weapons fire erupted from the outer perimeter. "Silthery raiders!" Kevin shouted as he grabbed his rifle and ordered his security team into defensive positions, telling Daniel to get to the medical bay and secure the supplies before the attackers could reach them. Daniel ran through the chaos without hesitation, his old training taking over as he moved through the corridors with speed and purpose, dodging panicked workers and falling debris until he reached the medical bay and began locking down the sensitive equipment. The Silthery had been enemies of humanity for decades, ever since first contact went wrong and both sides began fighting over territory in the outer systems. And though Daniel had seen enough of war to know that both sides had done terrible things, he also knew that the raiders showed no mercy to those they captured. He secured the last of the supplies and was about to head back to help Kevin when he heard a noise coming from the storage corridor nearby. A sound like someone trying to hide but failing to stay quiet. Daniel drew his sidearm and moved slowly toward the source of the sound, his heart pounding as he prepared for whatever enemy might be waiting around the corner, ready to defend himself if necessary, but hoping to avoid more bloodshed if possible. What he found surprised him. Crouched behind a stack of crates was a Silthery female, young and small compared to the warriors he had encountered before, with pale blue skin and wide silver eyes that stared up at him in pure terror as she clutched a wounded leg that was bleeding badly. She could not have been more than a child by human standards, maybe 16 or 17 years old if he guessed correctly, and her weapon lay on the ground several feet away where she had dropped it in her. Panicked Daniel kept his sidearm raised as he studied her, noticing the scalp markings on her uniform and the fear that filled her entire body as she trembled against the cold metal wall behind. The Silthery had taught their young ones many things about humans. Stories of monsters who killed without reason and showed no kindness to those they defeated. And this girl clearly believed every word of those terrible tales. She closed her eyes and lowered her head, certain that death was coming for her in the form of this human soldier who stood over her with a weapon in his hand. Waiting for the end that she had been told was inevitable when facing such a savage species. Daniel watched her prepare to die and something inside him shifted. Something that reminded him of why he had become a medic in the first place. Why he had spent years learning to save lives instead of taking them. He lowered his weapon. "Hey," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and gentle as he crouched down to her level. "I am not going to hurt you. Can you understand me?" Her eyes snapped open in shock and confusion, staring at him as if he had spoken words that made no sense. As if the very concept of mercy from a human was impossible to comprehend. "My name is Daniel," he continued, holstering his sidearm completely and showing her his empty hands. "You are hurt badly, and that wound needs treatment. Will you let me help you?" She did not answer, could not answer, because everything she had ever been taught was crumbling around her in that moment. And she did not know what to believe anymore. The sounds of battle continued in the distance. Explosions and gunfire echoing through the outpost as both sides fought for control. But in that small storage corridor, something different was happening. Something that would change everything. Daniel reached slowly for the medical kit on his belt, moving carefully so she would not think he was reaching for a weapon, and pulled out a bandage and antiseptic spray that he held up for her to see. "This is medicine," he explained in the simplest words he could find. "I was a medic once. I know how to fix wounds like yours. Please let me help." The young Sylphry looked at the items in his hands, then back at his face, searching for any sign of deception or cruelty, and finding none. Only patience, and something she had never expected to see in human eyes: kindness. She gave a small nod, barely visible, but enough, and Daniel moved closer to begin his work while the war raged on around them. Daniel worked carefully on the wound as the young Sylphry watched his every movement with eyes full of confusion and wonder. Unable to understand why this human was helping her instead of ending her life the way she had been told all humans would do. The gash on her leg was deep, and the edges had already begun to show signs of infection. A greenish color that told Daniel she had been hiding here for some time before he found her. Probably separated from her group during the initial attack. This might sting a little. He warned her before applying the antiseptic spray, and she flinched at the cold sensation but did not pull away. Watching as he cleaned the wound with practiced hands that moved gently despite their strengths, she finally spoke. Her voice small and uncertain as she formed the human words she had learned during her training as a scout. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel looked up at her face and saw the genuine confusion there. The complete inability to understand an act of kindness from an enemy. And it made him sad to think about what she must have been taught about his people. "Because you are hurt and you needed help," he answered simply, returning his attention to the bandage he was wrapping around her leg. "That is reason enough for me, but I am Sylphry," she pressed, still not understanding. "We are your enemies. We came here to attack your people. Why would you show me mercy?" Daniel finished securing the bandage and sat back on his heels, looking at her with calm and patient eyes that held no anger or hatred, despite everything she had just said. "What is your name?" he asked instead of answering her questions. She hesitated for a moment before responding. "Vara." "Vara," Daniel repeated, nodding slowly. "That is a nice name. How old are you, Vara?" 17 cycles, she answered, which Daniel calculated to be roughly equivalent to 16 human years. Just as young as he had guessed when he first saw her. "You are barely more than a child," he said softly, shaking his head. "You should not be in a place like this. Fighting a war you probably do not even understand," Vara wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that she understood perfectly well. That humans were dangerous monsters who had to be stopped before they conquered the entire galaxy. But the words would not come because the human sitting in front of her was nothing like the monsters from her lessons. He had shown her kindness when he could have shown cruelty, mercy when he could have shown violence, and she did not know how to fit that into the picture she had been given of his species. "The stories we are told," she began slowly, choosing her words with care. They say humans are without compassion, that you kill for pleasure and show no kindness to those you defeat. Daniel let out a long breath and nodded. Having heard similar things said about the Sylphari by humans who had never actually met one, people say terrible things about their enemies during wartime. He told her, "It is easier to fight someone if you believe they are monsters." But the truth is rarely so simple. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small container of water, opening it and offering it to her before taking a drink himself to show her it was safe. Vera accepted the water and drank deeply, realizing only then how thirsty she had become while hiding in this corridor, waiting for death to find her. "I grew up on a farm on Earth," Daniel continued, his voice taking on a distant quality as he remembered his home. "My parents taught me that every life has value, that helping others is never wrong, even when it is difficult or dangerous." "Earth," Vera repeated, having heard the name of the human homeworld many times, but never from a human themselves. "What is it like?" Daniel smiled at the question, a genuine warmth spreading across his face as he thought about the blue and green planet he had left behind so many years ago. "It is beautiful," he said. "There are mountains that touch the clouds and oceans so vast you cannot see the other side. Forests filled with countless creatures and deserts where the sand stretches forever under a golden sun." Vera listened with fascination as he described a world so different from the cold industrial planets of the Sylphari Dominion. A world where humans live not just as warriors, but as farmers and artists and dreamers. "We have families too," Daniel added, seeing the interest in her eyes. "People we love and protect, children we raise and teach. Just like your people do." The sounds of battle had grown quieter now, moving to other parts of the outpost as both sides continued their fight. But here in this hidden corner, two enemies sat together and talked like ordinary people. A crackling voice suddenly came through on Daniel's radio, startling them both. "Daniel, come in. This is Laura in the control room. Are you still alive out there?" He grabbed the radio and responded quickly. "I am here, Laura. I am safe for now. What is the situation?" "The raiders are pulling back to regroup, but they will be coming again soon," Laura's voice reported through the static. "Kevin is organizing a defense, but we are outnumbered. Where are you?" Daniel looked at Vera, who stared back at him with fear returning to her silver eyes as she realized that his people were looking for him and would soon discover that he was helping an enemy. "I am in the East Storage corridor," he answered carefully. "I need some time before I can join you." There was a pause before Laura responded. "What is going on, Danny? Is everything okay?" "I will explain later," he said. "Just give me a little time. I promise I know what I'm doing." The radio went silent, and Daniel clipped it back to his belt, turning his attention back to Vera, who was looking around desperately, as if searching for a way to escape. "If your people find me, they will take me prisoner," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "And if my people find out you helped me, they will call me a traitor." Daniel understood her fear because he knew she was right. Both sides would see this situation as wrong. Both would judge them for this moment of peace in the middle of a war. But he also knew he could not simply leave her here to be captured or killed. "I am going to help you get out of here," he decided, standing up and offering her his hand. "There is a neutral zone about 2 kilometers north. If we can get you there, you can make your way back to your people." Vera stared at his extended hand in disbelief. "You would risk your life to help me escape?" "I already risked my life to save you," Daniel pointed out with a slight smile. "Seems pointless to stop now." She took his hand and let him help her to her feet, testing her wounded leg and finding that while it hurt, she could walk with his support. "I do not understand you," she admitted quietly. "That is okay," Daniel replied as he led her toward the maintenance tunnels. "Maybe by the time we reach the neutral zone, you will." The maintenance tunnels were dark and narrow as Daniel led Vera through the twisting passages that ran beneath the outpost, using a small flashlight to guide their way while she limped along beside him with one hand pressed against the cold metal wall for support. Every few minutes they would stop and listen for sounds of movement above them, the muffled thunder of explosions and distant shouts reminding them that the battle was still raging while they crept through the shadows below. "How do you know these tunnels so well?" Vera asked in a whisper, impressed by how confidently Daniel navigated the maze of corridors and junctions. "I have been making supply runs to this outpost for 3 years," he explained quietly, "and I like to know every exit from any place I visit. It is a habit I picked up during my time as a soldier." She nodded in understanding, recognizing the wisdom of such caution, even if she had never thought to apply it herself during her short career as a scout. Daniel's radio crackled again, and Laura's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Danny, I can see 2 heat signatures moving through the lower tunnels on my scanner. Is that you?" He lifted the radio to his mouth and confirmed that it was him, asking her to guide them toward the north exit while avoiding any patrol routes from either side. "I have to ask," Laura said after a moment of silence, "who was with you down there? The second signature does not match any of our people." Daniel exchanged a look with Vera, seeing the fear flash across her face at the question, knowing that his answer could put her in danger if Laura decided to alert the others. "I found a wounded Silthery scout," he admitted honestly. "She is just a kid, Laura, barely 17 years old. I could not leave her there to die." The radio was quiet for so long that Daniel began to wonder if Laura had decided to report him. But then her voice came back with a heavy sigh. "You always were too kind for your own good, Danny. All right, I will help you get her out. But you better have a good explanation for Kevin when this is over." "Thank you, Laura," Daniel said with genuine gratitude. "I owe you one. You owe me about a dozen at this point," she replied. And Daniel could hear the faint smile in her voice despite the tension. "Now move quickly. There is a Silthery patrol heading toward Junction 7, and you need to be past there in the next 5 minutes." They picked up their pace as much as Vera's wounded leg would allow, Daniel supporting her weight when she stumbled and encouraging her forward with soft words of reassurance. "Your friend," Vera said between labored breaths. "She is helping us even though I am her enemy. Why?" "Because she trusts me," Daniel answered simply. "And because not everyone believes that war requires us to abandon our humanity." Vera was silent for a moment as she considered his words. The concept of humanity being used not as a name for his species, but as a description of compassion and mercy, something she had never encountered in any of her studies about humans. "Tell me more about your people," she requested as they moved through the darkness. "The real things, not the stories I was taught." Daniel thought about how to answer as he guided her around a corner and through a narrow passage that opened into a slightly wider tunnel. "We are complicated," he began, "capable of great cruelty, but also great kindness. We have fought terrible wars against each other throughout our history, but we have also created beautiful art and music and stories that celebrate love and hope and courage. Your people fight among themselves." Vera asked with surprise, having always been told that humans were a unified force bent on galactic domination. "We used to fight constantly," Daniel confirmed, "over land and resources and ideas, but eventually we learned that cooperation was better than conflict, that building together was more rewarding than destroying each other." He paused at a junction and checked his map, the 4 continuing left, deeper into the tunnel network, when we finally reached the stars and met other species. Many of us hoped we could extend the lesson outward, that we could build friendships with the other peoples of the galaxy, instead of repeating our old mistakes. But the war happened instead, Vera finished, a note of sadness in her voice. "The war happened instead," Daniel agreed. And now both our peoples tell stories about how terrible the other side is, how there can never be peace between us, how we must fight until one side is destroyed. They reached another junction, and Laura's voice guided them right, warning that a human patrol was moving through the parallel corridor and they should stay quiet until it passed as they waited in the shadows, pressed against the wall with their breathing slow and measured. Vera found herself standing closer to Daniel than she had ever stood to any human before, close enough to feel the warmth of his body and hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He did not feel like a monster. "I was told your people do not value life," she whispered when the patrol had moved on. "That you see other species as inferior, as things to be conquered and controlled." Daniel shook his head sadly. "Some humans believe that, just as some Silthari probably believe that your people should rule over all others. But most of us just want to live in peace, to raise our families and build our homes and explore the wonders of the universe without hurting anyone." "That is what most Silthari want too," Vera admitted quietly. "And maybe the war is not really between our peoples," Daniel suggested as they started moving again. "Maybe it is between those who want peace and those who profit from conflict." It was a thought that had never occurred to Vera before. The idea that the true enemy might not be the humans at all, but the leaders on both sides who kept the war burning for their own purposes. They emerged from the tunnels into a rocky ravine on the north side of the outpost, the cool night air washing over them as they climbed out of the darkness and into the faint glow of the distant stars. The neutral zone was visible in the distance, a ridgeline marked by beacon lights that designated the boundary between contested space and territory that neither side claimed. "We are almost there," Daniel said with relief, helping Vera down from the tunnel exit and supporting her as they began to cross the open ground. But they had only taken a few steps when a harsh voice rang out behind them, speaking in the Silthari language with cold authority. "Stop right there." Daniel turned to see a squad of Silthari soldiers emerging from the shadows, led by a tall warrior with scarred features and eyes full of contempt. "Commander Rothuk," Vera breathed, her voice filled with dread as she recognized the leader of the raiding party, the most ruthless officer in the entire assault force, and he was staring at them with murder in his eyes. Commander Rothuk stepped forward with his weapon raised as his soldiers spread out to surround Daniel and Vera, their rifles trained on the human who stood calmly despite being completely outnumbered and outgunned. "I should have known we would find treachery here," Rothuk growled, his scarred face twisted with disgust as he looked at Vera. A scout of the Dominion being led away by a human like some kind of pet. "It is not what you think, Commander," Vera started to explain. But Rothuk silenced her with a sharp gesture of his hand. "I can see exactly what it is," he spat. "This human has captured you and filled your head with lies, probably trying to extract information about our forces before he disposes of you." Daniel remained still, his hands visible and away from his weapon as he spoke in a steady voice. "I have not captured anyone. I found her wounded and I treated her injuries. I was trying to help her reach the neutral zone so she could return to your people safely." Rothuk laughed, a harsh and bitter sound that echoed across the rocky terrain. "Do you think me a fool, human? No one helps their enemy without expecting something in return. What is your game here? What do you really want?" "I want nothing," Daniel answered honestly. "I am just a cargo pilot who used to be a medic. When I saw a wounded child, I did what my training and my conscience told me to do." "She's not a child," Rothuk snarled. "She is a soldier of the Dominion, and you have corrupted her with whatever manipulation your species is famous for." Vera stepped forward despite the pain in her leg, her silver eyes meeting Rothuk's with a courage she did not know she possessed. "He did not manipulate me, Commander. He saved my life when he could have killed me. He showed me kindness when I expected only death. Everything we were taught about humans is wrong. The words seemed to strike Rothak like a physical blow, and his face darkened with rage as he pointed his weapon directly at Vera. You would defend this creature over your own people. You would betray everything you were raised to believe because of a few soft words from an enemy. I would speak the truth about what I witnessed, Vera replied, her voice trembling but determined. Is that not what we are supposed to do as scouts? Report what we see even when it challenges what we expect. Rothak's finger tightened on his trigger, and for a moment Daniel was certain he was about to watch this brave young woman die for the crime of telling the truth. He stepped between them without thinking, putting his body directly in the line of fire. If you want to shoot someone, shoot me, he said calmly. I am the one who helped her. I am the one who challenged the stories you tell about humans. She's just a child who got caught in the middle of something bigger than either of us. Rothak stared at him with a mixture of confusion and fury, unable to understand why this human would sacrifice himself for a Silvery after everything their peoples had done to each other. You would die for her? He demanded. I would die for doing what is right, Daniel corrected. Whether she is human or Silvery does not change the fact that she needed help, and I gave it. The standoff stretched on as the Silvery soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure how to react to what they were witnessing. A human willing to die for an enemy, a concept that contradicted everything they had been taught. Then new voices rang out across the terrain, and Daniel turned to see Kevin Price leading a squad of human soldiers toward them, weapons raised and faces grim as they took in the scene before them. Daniel, get behind us, Kevin called out as his people took up defensive positions. We have these raiders surrounded. But Daniel did not move. No, Kevin, he said firmly. We are not doing this. Kevin stared at him like he had lost his mind. What are you talking about? They were about to kill you, and now you are about to kill them. And then more Silvery will come to avenge their deaths, and more humans will die in response. And the cycle will continue forever until there is no one left on either side. He turned to face both groups, standing alone in the space between them with no weapon in his hands and no protection except the strength of his conviction. I am tired of this war, he declared, his voice carrying across the rocky ground to every soldier present. I am tired of killing people I have never met because someone told me they were my enemy. I am tired of teaching our children to hate before they even learn to love. He looked at Rothak, meeting the commander's eyes without fear. You want to know what I want. I want this to end. I want your people and my people to stop slaughtering each other over territory that neither of us really needs. I want that girl behind me to grow up in a galaxy where she does not have to be afraid every time she meets someone different from herself. Rothak said nothing, his weapon still raised but his finger no longer quite so tight on the trigger. I am going to make you an offer, Daniel continued. We have wounded Silvery in our medical bay, taken during the fighting. I propose we release them to you in exchange for a ceasefire. Both sides withdraw and no more blood is spilled today. Kevin started to object, but Daniel silenced him with a look. This is not surrender, Kevin. It is sanity. We both know this outpost is not worth dying for. Not when we could end this without losing anyone else. The silence stretched on as both sides waited for someone to make a decision. The tension so thick it seemed to press down on everyone like a physical weight. Finally, Vera spoke again, stepping out from behind Daniel to address Rothak directly. Commander, I have seen something today that I never expected to see. A human who chose mercy over violence, compassion over hatred. Perhaps the old teachings are not as complete as we believed. Rothak looked at her for a long moment, then at Daniel, then at the human soldiers who stood ready to fight but clearly hoped they would not have to when he finally lowered his weapon. It felt like the entire universe exhaled. We will accept your terms, human, he said slowly, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him against his will. Release our wounded and we will withdraw. Daniel nodded and turned to Kevin, who still looked uncertain, but finally gave the order for his people to stand down as both sides began the careful process of arranging the exchange. Rothak approached Daniel with an expression that was impossible to read. "This changes nothing," he said quietly. "The war will continue. Our leaders will demand it." "Maybe," Daniel acknowledged. "But today, it stops here, and maybe tomorrow it will stop somewhere else. And eventually, maybe there will be enough tomorrows that people forget why we were fighting in the first place." Rothak had no response to that, so he simply turned and walked away to oversee the withdrawal of his forces. The exchange went smoothly as both sides honored the agreement, with wounded Silthari soldiers being carried out of the human medical bay and returned to their own people, while the human defenders watched in silence from their positions around. The outpost Daniel stood near the boundary line as the last of the prisoners were handed over. Watching Rothak organize his forces for the withdrawal that would take them back to Silthari, Space Vera approached him one final time, walking without a limp now thanks to the treatment he had given her, though she would carry the scar on her leg for the rest of her life as a reminder of this day. "I do not know how to thank you for what you did," she said softly, her silver eyes glistening with emotions she could not name. "You do not have to thank me," Daniel replied with a gentle smile. "Just remember what happened here. Remember that not everything you were taught about humans is true. And maybe someday tell others what you learned." She nodded solemnly. "I will. I promise I will tell everyone who will listen. That is all I ask," Daniel said, extending his hand to her in the human gesture of friendship and respect. Vera looked at his hand for a moment, then reached out and took it, feeling the warmth of his grip and the strength of his conviction flowing through that simple touch. "Goodbye, Daniel Carter," she said as she released his hand and turned to rejoin her people. "I hope we meet again someday. In a galaxy that has learned to choose peace over war." "So do I, Vera," he called after her. "So do I." He watched her walk away until she disappeared among the Silthari forces, then turned back to the outpost where Kevin was waiting with questions in his eyes and concerns on his face, but the debriefing could wait. Daniel thought to himself as he looked up at the stars that stretched endlessly above them. Tonight he just wanted to believe that what he had done mattered. Months passed and life returned to normal for Daniel as he continued his cargo runs across the outer systems, delivering supplies and equipment to colonies that depended on independent freighters like himself to keep him connected to the wider galaxy. Thought about Vera often, wondering if she had kept her promise, wondering if her story had reached anyone who might listen, wondering if one small act of mercy could really make any difference in a conflict that had consumed so many lives. Then, one evening as he was preparing for another routine delivery, a news broadcast caught his attention and he stopped everything to listen as the reporter described something that seemed impossible. The Silthari Dominion had requested formal peace negotiations with humanity. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief as the report continued, explaining that a senior diplomat named Ambassador Silith had approached human representatives with an offer to discuss ending hostilities, citing new information about human nature that had caused them to reconsider their position. The broadcast cut to footage of the diplomatic meeting, showing Ambassador Silith standing before an assembly of representatives from dozens of species in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, and standing beside her, wearing the formal robes of a peace envoy, was Vera. Daniel watched as she stepped forward to address the council, her voice clear and confident as she told them about a day on a remote mining outpost when a human had shown her that everything she believed about his species was wrong. "I was wounded and alone," she explained to the assembly, "surrounded by enemies with no hope of survival. And when a human found me, I closed my eyes and waited for death because that is what I had been taught to expect." She paused and looked directly at the camera as if she knew somehow that Daniel might be watching, but death did not come. Instead, he knelt beside me and treated my wounds with gentle hands. He spoke to me with kindness and patience, and when I asked him why he was helping an enemy, he gave me an answer that changed my life. The council chamber was completely silent as every representative leaned forward to hear her words. He said, "Because you needed help." That is reason enough for me. Vera let those words hang in the air before continuing. I was taught that humans were monsters without compassion, killers who showed no mercy to those they defeated. But what I witnessed was the exact opposite. I saw a man who risked his life to save someone his people considered an enemy, who chose mercy over violence even when no one would have blamed him for the other choice. She turned to face the human delegation, her silver eyes filled with hope and determination. If one human can show such kindness to one Silthery, then perhaps our peoples are not as different as we have been led to believe. Perhaps the hatred between us is not natural, but manufactured. Perhaps peace is possible if we are brave enough to reach for it. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated the implications of her testimony, some dismissing it as propaganda, while others wondered aloud if the time had come to end a war that had cost both sides so dearly. Daniel watched it all unfold from his small cargo ship, tears streaming down his face as he realized that his simple act of compassion had rippled outward across the galaxy to touch the hearts and minds of beings he would never meet. A few days later, a message arrived in his communication system. Bearing diplomatic encryption that took him several minutes to decode it, was from Vera. "Dear Daniel," the message read, "I kept my promise. I told everyone who would listen about what you did for me." And slowly the story spread until it reached people with the power to make real change. Ambassador Silith heard my testimony and believed me. She convinced the council that humans might not be the monsters we were taught to fear. And now, for the first time in decades, there is hope that our peoples might find another path. Daniel read on with his heart pounding in his chest. I am a peace envoy now, working to build bridges between our species. And every day I think about the human who taught me that mercy is not weakness, but strength. That compassion is not foolishness, but wisdom. That one person can change the course of history simply by choosing to do what is right. The message concluded with words that Daniel would carry with him for the rest of his life. You showed me what your people truly are. Not the monsters of our stories, but beings capable of extraordinary kindness. And now the galaxy is finally learning what I learned in that storage corridor when you raised your hand not to strike, but to heal. Thank you, Daniel Carter. Thank you for teaching me that hope is always worth fighting for. Daniel sat alone in his cockpit as the stars wheeled slowly past his windows, thinking about a wounded girl who had expected death and found something far more powerful instead. He had not set out to change the galaxy, had simply helped someone who needed it, and sometimes, he realized now, that was enough.